to infinity and beyond.
This is me. This is how I win.
Were you rushing or were you dragging? Answer!
You're a wizard, Harry.
Say what again? Say what again? I dare you.
No, I am your father.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
And here we go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back inside the film room. I'm Zach Goins, and I'm here with Johnny Sobchak. It's been far too long. It has been months at this point since our last podcast, but that's because things have been pretty busy. We've been doing a whole lot of fun interviews, videos, all sorts of stuff. So you haven't been missing Inside the Film Room, just the Inside the Film Room podcast. Johnny, we haven't recorded since Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 back in May. How are you? A lot has happened since then. A lot of movies have been seen, TV shows have been watched. It's time to catch up.
Yeah, it sure is. It's great to be back. There's been, as you mentioned, much ado about something. And so we have a lot to kind of dive into in terms of kind of reflecting on the first half of the year, movies, television, and also a big new release that is coming up right around the corner. And I'm excited to talk about that with you because we just saw it a couple days ago.
Absolutely. That is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, the 7th installment in that franchise. Johnny and I had the chance to check it out, and it will be hitting theaters here shortly. And we're going to be reviewing that. But also, like he said, looking back at the first half of 2023, it's already somehow July. We're over halfway through this year. So we will be taking a fun little spin with the 2023 So Far Superlatives, handing out some awards for some of our favorites and not so favorites and surprises and whatnot, all sorts of different categories that we're going to dive into in movies and television. So that's what we've got in store for you today. But first things first, we got to throw out the obligatory reminder for the Rewind newsletter for our YouTube channel. You heard us mention it earlier. Interviews galore. Ted Lasso, Shrinking, Schmigadoon, all three of those interviews with pretty much the entire cast, breaking it all down. Award season is upon us. Emmy nominations come out here in just a couple days. So check out those interviews. There's a ton of fun Easter eggs. And if you haven't watched those shows, be sure to do that because it'll obviously make the interviews even better. But, you know, we've got the likes of Keegan-Michael Key from Schmigadoon there. We've got no Harrison Ford, unfortunately, for Shrinking, but we've got Jessica Williams, Krista Miller from Shrinking. We've got pretty much everyone except Jason Sudeikis from Ted Lasso. So a ton of stuff, a ton of fun to have over there. Check it out on YouTube and make sure you're subscribed to the Rewind newsletter so you don't miss anything coming straight to your inbox. But Johnny, other than that, man, it's been, you know, we usually have our what's going on, what have we watched lately. This list could get long because, like I said, it's been since May that we have recorded. So if you've got it already, feel free. If not, what are the highlights? What's been going on, movies, TV, otherwise for you?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, obviously, there's, like you said, a lot to kind of recap in terms of the last couple of months. But I would say that the highlights, as far as, you know, what I've really been focusing on with TV, it's been kind of a mixture. It's kind of based on my own mood and then also what Reagan, my girlfriend, kind of wants to watch and what we decide on checking out. So we did watch, I know, and we have some overlap here, of course, but with TV, we had Silo on Apple TV Plus, which we were, you know, lucky enough to be able to access those episodes early. So we kind of binged right through that, which was great. And then there was also, in addition to Succession, at the same time, there was Barry season 4, which was the final season.
Right. We have not talked since Barry, Ted Lasso, and Succession all ended, which are like three pillars of this podcast. Yeah. So it's been not to get to break all those down. I know we're late at this point, but those are some big ones.
Yeah, absolutely. We're pretty big fans of those here on the podcast. So it's almost weird kind of just like glancing over that. But yeah, Barry, which was I thought exceptional, as a final season kind of finale. And then also I went back and watched, this was a first time watch for me. I binged it in like a couple of days, basically after work. I watched Fleabag, finally, years later. um, but I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I definitely understand the hype now, which not to say I never credit it or anything, but I just didn't really know much about it.
Right.
But Phoebe Waller-Bridge was fantastic. Kind of not a one-woman show because the whole cast is great, but she's definitely the focal point creatively. And then also with newer stuff, Reagan and I, we watched Jury Duty on Amazon,
Hmm.
which I'll mention a little bit later. But I don't know if you've seen or heard of that, but it's a very,
Of course.
very funny kind of hybrid reality TV, scripted TV experiment almost. And it's the less you know about it, the better. But it was really fun. We binged that in a day as well. And then there was also I Think You Should Leave, which I'm a big fan of on Netflix with Tim Robinson. And then also right now, what we're going through is getting caught up on The Righteous Gemstones on
Oh,
HBO
so
or
good.
Max. I didn't know you watched that. It is
Yeah.
so funny. It's so good. The cast is fantastic, and we've been kind of semi binging it. It's been a little bit spread out, but we're just about done with the second season, and we're hoping to get caught up. The third season's ongoing, so maybe this week we can get fully caught up for the new one.
Yeah, Righteous Gemstones is hysterical. Danny McBride, like that whole cast is just amazing, but the way that it's so like growing up in the South, like I'm sure both of
Oh,
us are overly
100%.
familiar with like religion and churches, mega churches, this in the mega church industrial complex, and like all
Yeah.
of this feels like all too real. Obviously, it's like excessive to the extreme, but the way that they
Yeah.
like make it like they take it to that extreme, but also make it feel so like believable as if it could be something real. It's hilarious. Those first two seasons are great, and this third season is really funny as well. I'm watching that currently. Watching Hijack on Apple. That's the Idris Elba, the new show where it's 7 episodes, I think, and it all unfolds like quote unquote in real time as a plane is going from Dubai to London, gets hijacked. It's a 7 hour flight, so it's 7 hour long episodes. Um,
Oh wow, that's cool.
I think it's sort of like throwback to 24, Jack Bauer. But I think it's on maybe like episode 4 at this point. We're a little bit ahead with screeners, but it's pretty good. Idris Elba is all like I'll never not watch Idris Elba being a cool, charming badass. So he's a passenger on the plane who's trying to like help negotiate and save everybody. Um, so that's been good. I say I'm watching The Idol. I know it ended last week. I've watched 2 or 3 episodes. I haven't finished it. I don't know if I will. But like it's only 5 episodes, so I feel like I might as well just finish it out at this point. And I started Secret Invasion, the new MCU show. I only watched the first episode there, but I think they're on 2 or 3 at this point. So we'll see if I continue there. But like you said, there's a bunch of stuff that has been finished since we last recorded. I mentioned Succession, Barry, Ted Lasso. Silo is brilliant, amazing, wonderful, love it. We're going to be talking about that a good bit here in the superlatives once we get to it, I believe. Platonic on Apple, that honestly, I think it might still be going on. I think it's so, I don't know if you've gotten to this. I know you just recently got set up with the Apple screeners.
Mhm.
But it's so like they usually give you like everything all at once. And so you're able to just binge stuff. And I'm like, oh wait, that's still happening. People haven't finished it, not to like sound snobby or anything, but I think
Elitist.
I know I don't mean to sound that way, but it's just this phenomenon that has happened to me. I think Platonic has 1 episode left, maybe, or it just ended. But that's Rose Byrne, Seth Rogen, a fun little comedy there. That it's not quite as outrageous as those two and Neighbors, which I love both of those movies so much. But it's still a good time, a lot of fun. Saint X on Hulu. That was a kind of like a knockoff White Lotusy type, which I still haven't watched. Don't get mad at me. Need to watch White Lotus. but that was fine. And Jury Duty that you mentioned, I can't remember if we talked about that previously. Love that. We'll mention that later on. But a lot of TV, and then catching up a ton at the theater. I'd had a really slow start to 2023 at the movie theater, but Across the Spider-Verse, No Hard Feelings, The Flash, Joyride, Shazam 2, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and of course Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 that we'll be talking about here in a bit. A lot of good stuff there. Mostly all good stuff. The Flash, Shazam 2, DC is in shambles. Just need to hit that reset button, keep it moving. But a lot of fun stuff with Spider-Verse obviously being amazing. No Hard Feelings and Joyride bringing the R-rated comedy back to life. Love to see it. I had a good time with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Was it the best Indiana Jones movie? No. But was it Harrison Ford going on an adventure, being, a new version of Indy, as he's we got used to this like grumpy version of him in real life and in Shrinking, and he's always kind of gruff as Indy, but a little bit more grumpy now that we've got the aging Harrison Ford, the aging look at Indy here. So I had a good time with that. Phoebe Waller-Bridge that you mentioned from Fleabag is in that as well, and she's a lot of fun as his goddaughter on this adventure. But just staying busy, man. It's been a good year for movies and TV so far. Really good year, and a lot to look forward to. But we'll get into some of those highlights as we get into our superlatives after this. But Johnny, I know you mentioned TV. What movies have you been watching lately?
Yeah, so again, quite a bit of overlap since Guardians with kind of what you've seen and I've seen. Although I think you've seen definitely some films that I haven't, and don't necessarily plan to see, like The Flash or Indiana Jones. But I'll take your word for it. I would say, I definitely express the love for Across the Spider-Verse that pretty much everyone else already has at this point. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, more recent stuff. So we have Joyride, which is actually coming out. By the time people hear this podcast, it'll come out the previous weekend. So hopefully people will go out and support that, because I had a lot of fun with it, and I know you did too. And then also, as far as some smaller films that were coming out in June that I got to see in theaters, there was Asteroid City, which I thought was pretty good from Wes Anderson, his latest film. And then I also saw Past Lives, which was really good. From
I
Celine
still need
Song.
to see that. I had a ticket for it, and then something came up, but I had to cancel. But it's definitely on my list as one of the top priorities to check out.
Yeah, I tweeted just a little bit about it, but it was definitely a impressive kind of directorial debut for Celine Song. She'd never directed anything before, no music videos, short films, commercials, from what I understand. So a very interesting kind of road, in A24, of course, supporting her, not only as the writer of the film, but then giving her the chance to direct it. But yeah, I quite enjoyed that. A lot of people saying it's the best film of the year so far. Wouldn't quite go that far with it. I thought it was great. I didn't think it's not quite the masterpiece that a lot of other people have said, at least from what I ended up feeling about it, but I did really, really like it. So I definitely recommend it. And it's doing pretty well at the box office. It's got a smaller kind of release. It's been a little bit staggered, but it's putting up, pretty good numbers. So if you have a chance, it only just recently expanded, I think. So it's worthwhile if you get the chance to see it, with all the blockbusters and big budget movies that are, still around the corner. That between that and Joyride and some of these others, Asteroid City, there's plenty of other options out there for sure. But yeah, it has been a little bit, I guess I was kind of slacking in the wake of Guardians. I felt like there was a big gap for me. And then Spider-Verse kind of let in, at the beginning of June, and then got some of these smaller movies again sprinkled throughout. So not like a super busy part of the year as far as like what I want to go see and, spending time at the theater, I guess. But July, I think, is especially, we're already off to a pretty good start in terms of spending time there. And we know that we have Barbenheimer not too far away now. So before we know it, the summer feels like it's going to be, over, which is crazy. But it's been it's again just reflecting on the first half of the year and just the last couple of months. It's been good. I can't really complain too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's still some that like I'm not necessarily sprinting to go see, but some that I'd like to catch up on. I mentioned Past Lives, but Elemental, the latest Pixar movie. I've heard good things. It just it flopped financially at the box office, it seems, but
is actually that's the that's the impressive thing with the word of mouth and people seeming to like it. It's actually legging out pretty decently, and it might be able to break even. I don't think it's even necessarily going to be an outright flop, even though the opening weekend was really bad.
It
It was
seemed like
comparable to The Flash, but
yeah, I mean, it seemed like it just kind of came and went with little to no fanfare as far as like people like it didn't really have much staying power at the top of the theater, I guess. As you said,
no,
if it's got the legs to kind of keep people coming back, but it was not like a big smash hit like we've come to expect from Pixar,
no,
3-4 years ago. But now
definitely not.
that one I still want to check out Extraction 2 on Netflix because Tyler Rake, aka Chris Hemsworth, Jake had big praise for that as just being absolutely nuts. The first one was like just literally like a Call of Duty turned into a movie. So I'm excited to check out that at some point. I know Flamin' Hot on Hulu is supposed to be pretty good. That's the Hot Cheetos movie, Ava Longoria's directorial debut. But
Oh wow, yeah.
Transformers, I don't know if I'll go see it in theaters, if it even still is in theaters. The Little Mermaid, both of those are probably going to be like catch up at the end of the year if I get to it. But just like those are definitely like big franchise movies that have come out in the time that we haven't recorded. But we'll see if we get to any sort of coverage of those. But there is one big movie that we are going to be diving into here. It's Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Like I said earlier, this is the 7th Mission Impossible movie in the franchise. It's the 3rd from director Christopher McQuarrie, who took over and kind of breathed a new life into this I mean, it was always a great franchise, and with the exception of 2, which I've gone back and leading into this, I was kind of rewatching a lot of these movies. I haven't finished yet, so I'll be doing some homework after having seen Dead Reckoning to finish my binge. But he took over, and Fallout, obviously, back in 2018 was one of the best movies, action movies of the last 20 years, Mission Impossible or otherwise. It was absolutely, I think I can speak for both of us when I say that it's the epitome of like what a modern action movie should be. So following that up is no easy task. Like I said, all of these movies from him have been great, but a lot of big shoes to fill here, as Kendall Roy would say, big shoes, big shoes. But I'll be interested. I know we had a little chat after we both saw the movie, so I know some of your thoughts here, but we'll have to get into it. But let me set the stage here. Tom Cruise is obviously back as Ethan Hunt. We've got Haley Atwell playing a newcomer in Grace. She's one of the new, I don't know if I would quite call her an agent, but someone on the mission with Tom Cruise, with Ethan Hunt. We've got the squad back with Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, Rebecca Ferguson, and then some bad guys coming in here with Vanessa Kirby appearing as the White Widow again, Asai Morales, and Pom Clemente both joining as new characters. So the old crew, some new people, but this is getting a ton of high praise, Johnny. 99% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes currently. We don't have an audience score yet because it has not fully released to the public. But my score here, I'm looking at, this is, again, seen it once at a screening, came out, was fired up. I want to go back and see it again, but currently sitting at a 4-star review, 87 out of 100. This is pretty great for me. I think I have Fallout at like a high 90s, like 97 or something like that. So it's significantly lower than what Fallout was, but pretty great for me as far as a follow-up. But I know you were a little bit lower here.
Yeah, a little bit less effusive praise from me. I did like it, I did enjoy it, but I would say, yeah, I'm a step down at least, maybe a step and a half or 2 steps down from your praise. It's like a decent like 3.5 out of 5 stars for me, probably maybe like right 65, 70 out of 100. I enjoyed it. I had a good time. I didn't, feel like I wasted time or feel like I got a bad shake in terms of, going and spending time at the movies. And I'm going to be seeing it again. So I definitely need to get another round of letting all the exposition and all the new characters and all the action kind of wash over me again and just see how I feel. Because I feel like you can't really grasp a movie, especially a movie this big, entirely on the first watch. So But again, Mission Impossible, I would say genuinely might be my favorite film franchise ever at this point. Now I know that there's other great franchises that I love, of course, and will support, but the longevity of this franchise and how many entries that there have been at this point, and how much I love, pretty much the last three movies I think are all like close to masterpieces in terms of action.
Right.
And the first Mission Impossible's, a classic, and it's gone through so many transformations over the years, but they have gotten into this nice not formula necessarily, but they have a nice kind of template that you expect, because Christopher McQuarrie is the writer and director, and this is his third film in that role. You kind of know what you're going to get, and there's a certain level of expectation and kind of standard. And I think that this mostly meets those requirements, but it just fell a little bit more flat in areas that I think in the past, and for especially the last few films, it's kind of always hit the mark for me. So yeah, I'm definitely curious to hear more of your thoughts and kind of dig into it a bit more.
I mean, I'm totally with you on this being like one of my favorite franchises. And I think one of the things we said when we were talking afterwards is that, like, as you were mentioning just now, you didn't have a bad time. Like, you weren't upset that you went to go see it. Like, sure, you may not have loved it as much as some of the other movies in the series, but there's not a bad, say what you will about Mission Impossible 2. Like, it's still a fun action movie, but there's no, like, I think for me, the floor of this franchise is like 3 stars still, which is like pretty great. If you're 7 movies deep and you've never had anything less than a 3, like, I don't think there's many franchises that can say something like that. But so I totally am with you there as far as just like this being great. And with that, this was my most anticipated movie of the year. This was coming off of one of my all-time favorites. And you said it best. You can't really fully process a movie of this scale with this much going on. And especially with it being such a big blockbuster, explosive set pieces, high octane energy. Like, that's why we need to both see it again, so that we can have more put together thoughts, because it's so easy to be caught up in like, oh my God, Tom Cruise is going off the mountain. Like, this is like, these movies are such a vibe, to put it simply, of like, it's easy to just get swept up in that maybe like, and I know, I feel like in general, it tends to be with the two of us that I'm like more willing to overlook things because I was really into the vibe, whereas you're more of like okay, well, this didn't really work for me, that didn't. So I'm curious, once we're obviously going to talk about it now, but once we have both seen it again and reconvene, how thoughts may change. But
and this is the longest one of the entire franchise as well. You're talking about how big it is and how much there is to digest. And I think that was one of the things, just as off the top of my head, that I think it did hinder it a little bit in terms of the overall flow and kind of experience. I thought that one of the exceptional qualities of this franchise, that part of why I love it so much, especially Fallout, because again, Fallout, you said it kind of best at the top when we got into this, but that might be my favorite action film ever. And I saw it 5 times in theaters, in IMAX every time. I've seen it probably 8 or 9 times total at home, included. I can't get enough of it. That movie, and then also the previous couple as well, they're paced to perfection. The edits just feel so clean and obvious, and like it's just effortless almost, when it obviously isn't, especially with the stunts that they're executing. And also how that's balanced with the spectacle, but also the character work, and then also the plotting and the exposition. Obviously, Mission Impossible, there's always a mission briefing. There's always devices and different locales and characters that are being introduced. So you expect a lot of information coming at you. But they've always done it in such a way that it feels, again, effortless, and it's very brisk and kind of keeps things moving. And I think, just as we're kind of diving into this, one of my things was that I felt, at least on first viewing, it was a little bogged down in some of the talk about like the MacGuffin of the movie, the plot device that they're all chasing after, and also some of the new characters and the history between the characters and those relationships. And then so by the end, like the kind of the tail end of the movie, and sometimes in the middle, it just sags a little bit. You're kind of like, okay, well, what's the next thing? Or like what's going on necessarily in the scene that we're supposed to take away from it. and that again, those are questions because I have such a high expectation and a good
Mhm.
experience with this franchise. I have never really felt like those feelings necessarily when I'm sat in the theater watching Ghost Protocol or Rogue Nation or Fallout.
Right.
Um, but
It's this movie. As I was doing this rewatch, I was kind of shocked at this point to realize the runtimes of these movies. I mean, obviously the first one is way back in 1996, so like we hadn't really gotten to the age where like every blockbuster has to be 2.5+ hours. But
yeah,
that movie was 110 minutes, so we're looking at an hour 50. Like that's pretty
yeah,
crisp. And then to get to even Fallout being the most recent prior to this, that movie was 2 hours and 27 minutes, which is a
yeah.
respectable runtime. But now we're looking at 2:43. So
Mm-hmm.
like pretty much 20 minutes extra movie here. And you're absolutely right that even as much as I said that I really enjoyed this and loved it, that it's it's a ton of plot. There's a lot of stuff going on, and this is also part one of what it's being called Mission Impossible:
Yeah.
Dead Reckoning Part One.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's kind of I wonder if how much of okay, we've got part one, we've got part two. We need to, as we've seen with some of these movies that do get split into two parts, where it's like, okay, well, we need to find a way to stretch this one to justify rather than having one movie that is like 4 hours long. We need to stretch this into 2.5+ hour movies to like justify each one. So I wonder how much of an impact that made
Yeah.
to what they put together here. But we're mentioning the plot, we're dancing all around it. Let me give you a quick rundown of what this movie is about. Ethan Hunt and his IMF team embark on their most dangerous mission yet to track down a terrifying new weapon that threatens all of humanity before it falls into the wrong hands. That sounds like pretty much every Mission Impossible movie, let's be real. But with control of the future and the fate of the world at stake and dark forces from Ethan's past closing in, a deadly race around the globe begins. Confronted by a mysterious, all-powerful enemy, Ethan is forced to consider that nothing can matter more than his mission, not even the lives of those he cares about most. So, nothing too revealing there as far as plot specifics go. But Johnny, I guess as we dive into this is going to be spoiler territory, so that's why go see this movie before you listen to the episode. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess feel free to take it away as far as what we're if we want to dive in first, what were the issues here as far as the plot or pacing that kind of brought you out of this a little bit?
Yeah, and I was doing some writing on the movie last night. I was watching The Dark Knight, and I just had my computer up, and I was kind of typing out some thoughts on it. And I think a microcosm of my issues with the film can be tracked to the opening of the film. So, as we know with Mission Impossible, there's always an opening sequence, and usually maybe it involves a big stunt or a big dramatic moment, and then we're led into, which is always a fun sequence, the opening credits, which usually has different
Mm-hmm.
visuals and things from later in the movie and whatnot that you can kind of like get little hints from. And so with this one, you're kind of settling into it, and it starts. There's this submarine sequence, and it's a Russian submarine, and there's like this voiceover from some unknown kind of Russian like operative or someone on the submarine, and they're talking about basically the MacGuffin of the film, or like the big entity, as they call it in the movie, which is kind of the villain, the omnipresent but invisible villain. It's an AI essentially. And we kind of get an idea of what the AI is capable of and like how it can, how dangerous it can be in this opening submarine sequence. And then it goes to, it's pretty fun. It's got a little, it's got twists and turns, and it's pretty suspenseful. And then it goes to the mission briefing, which again, we can always expect from these movies, where Ethan gets his briefing. He meets some new, apparently, agent in IMF, which it was kind of confusing the way they were like setting up this relationship between this guy that's walking in, like, who is he? And then like Ethan knows him, and obviously he's in the IMF, but he's
Mm-hmm.
new, which I guess ties into someone else in the movie who is kind of new and joining the IMF. And there's this idea of that they implement in this movie, which they haven't really touched on in the past, which is, well, how do people become part of the IMF? And
Right.
what makes a good IMF agent? What is the purpose of the group? And so there's that briefing, and there's kind of like this quick setup about what's going on with Ilsa, Rebecca Ferguson's character, who I love and is really one of my favorite characters, like in action films, and is right up there with Ethan Hunt as far as this franchise is concerned. And then it jumps into this kind of wild sandstorm desert sequence where Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt is out there, and he's on horseback, and there's people chasing after him, and there's Ilsa's there, Rebecca Ferguson with an eye patch, for some reason. And then we have kind of a brief it wraps up pretty quickly, and it kind of leaves it a little ambiguous in terms of what happens. And then we go into a fourth scene, which is these people in this room, a bunch of characters we've never seen before, just talking about the entity and the MacGuffin and kind of, where the world is now and all these different things. And it goes on for a few minutes, and then it reintroduces Eugene Kittredge, who is one of the IMF heads from the first movie, who hasn't appeared in any of the films since then. And there's this fun kind of scene where he's able to come face to face with Ethan Hunt, and it's kind of played for laughs. And then there's kind of this intense little showdown or face off between them. And then it goes into like the credit sequence. So all of that is to say that opening, I don't even know how long it is, maybe 15 or 20 minutes before we even get to the title card. It kind of is my issue with the movie overall, where it just feels like it's a little belabored. It's a little like too convoluted. Like I can't really grasp like what's going on in the scene, or like why, like who is who, and like why are we talking about like some of the things that they are. In this case, in the opening, obviously it's to set up some different characters and to set up some different plot devices and things like that, and some of the the overall kind of themes of the film. But it just feels so like 4 different scenes essentially mushed together, where typically you would expect with Mission it's maybe 1 or 2 scenes, including a big action set piece or like a stunt. And this, it just felt a little underwhelming and a little kind of confusing almost in terms of like how I was supposed to feel. And by the end of it, I'm like, okay, well now we're moving on to the rest of the movie now. And so then that feeling though kind of returned. It was just kind of an odd way to start off, and then that feeling that I had continued to rise up during certain scenes and sequences in the film, where I was just kind of like not sure how to feel about the way that they were depicting this character, the relationship that we were supposed to take away from certain characters, and then also just the story in terms of that MacGuffin that I'm talking about, which is a kind of 2 keys, but it's technically 1 key because they're combined. And they're kind of chasing that all over the planet, and that's used for what? Well, we don't really know. We kind of know, it's implied, and then there's the entity that's involved, and then there's also a human villain named Gabriel from Ethan's past, apparently, although we don't really know the capacity that they knew each other. But he was involved kind of with maybe how Ethan got into the IMF. But there's just it kind of fluctuates throughout the film in a way, in terms of the action and then exposition and then action, and the balance, which has always been impeccable, like I've said, with these movies. And I watched Fallout for probably the 9th time overhaul, the night before we saw this. So I had a very clear idea of like, after seeing Fallout, which is one of my favorite films, this was one of my most anticipated movies of the last few years, like during the pandemic, when they had to film this through the pandemic, and, they had different production issues. And I almost feel like you could kind of sense that in the movie in terms of how they used certain actors, or the presence of certain actors or characters in the movie, and the way certain things were shot and whatnot. But, I really expected this to be on par with Fallout. And again, you have to take it on its own merits, which I think even on its own merits, it falls a little flat for me, because this movie, maybe more than any of the others of the 7 movies now, really relies on you being familiar with and knowing almost all the other movies, or at least some of them, because of the way the characters are set up and they talk about different plot lines. It's a lot to digest, as we've kind of touched on multiple times now. But I'm curious, Zach, for you, the way I just kind of summarized at least the opening and how that made me feel and how it connected to some of the other parts of the movie. Did you feel at all similarly, or like thinking on it now, like did that seem strange to you, or not totally maybe satisfying at all?
I mean, that's all very valid, and I agree with what you said about this feeling connected to all of the other movies. Like you said, most of these can like stand on their own, but obviously are enhanced by the other movies. This one has a lot of those connections to what was previously going on with the characters, and also a lot of like not connections, where I remember we were talking afterwards and I was like, did I miss something? Like, is Gabriel, the Asai Morales character that turns out to be one of the villains, like I was like, is he from a previous movie? Did I not catch that, but no, it's from Ethan's past, but we don't have, you know, him and this woman Marie that was newly introduced, and I found myself confused and questioning whether I was supposed to know them or not.
Yeah.
And you're just not. It's kind of these little very brief flashback sequences that you maybe, I guess I imagine we're going to get more answers in this part too. But that, and then some of the other characters, like I had completely forgotten until afterwards that Kittredge had been in the first movie and then comes back, because it's been 6 movies in between.
Yeah.
But I agree with a lot of what you said about the pacing of like start and stop with the action, but I never found myself, I think you used the term like glazed over when some of the conversations went on too long, or they were talking about the entity too much. I never found myself, you know, where any of this was too detrimental to my enjoyment of it, because there is so much to, honestly, I feel like a lot of it was just me being very invested to keep up, which is like, you know, could be good, could be bad, of making sure I understand what the entity is and what the plan is and who the bad guys are. But some of those scenes, I agree that I was surprised. I was like, wait, we haven't had the credits yet, or not the credits, the title sequence when we finally got to it. But then a lot of that kind of goes away, especially like the Kittredge scene, and then comes back later into play. So it's like, okay, we had to get this in there at some point really early so that we could then return to some of the stuff from it. But I feel like for me, there was so much enjoyment in the in-between of some of the stuff that you critiqued, of like the slower dialogue heavy moments where, you know, obviously we all know about the gigantic set piece that comes in the finale of this movie, being that we've all seen all of the teasers and first looks and featurettes of the driving the motorcycle off the cliff sequence. I even though I saw it, it was still ridiculously impressive, and there's still a good bit of footage there that has not been spoiled by that. So I feel like I know we had discussed, at least on our own, talking about, is this really gonna, like, are they giving too much away by showing us this, like shoving this down our throat? But it was still great. But even beyond that, there's a lot of fun big action set pieces and also just very tense moments. I know we had discussed one of my favorites being there's a sequence where it's kind of like a manhunt at an airport, and it's not necessarily like things aren't blowing up, there's not a shootout, there's not really a ton of action, but it's very tense. There's a bomb in play that they're having to defuse, and I think that was a very good example of this franchise being able to still have action and, you know, tense suspense without it being Tom Cruise dangling from a helicopter with his shirt on fire or something.
Yeah, no, I certainly feel the same, especially about that airport sequence. I think that one was one that they didn't show very much of in the promotional material, so we didn't really know what the involvement of the airport was, or what the situation was. And I thought that was a great way of, again, right after the opening title sequence, to just get us right into the action. And that was much more investing and economical than the preceding action and kind of suspenseful sequences that we had gotten. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I think that, again, that was kind of it's the jumping off point for a lot of things, including Haley Atwell's character, because that's where we meet her, and that's also where we get our first real glimpse of Gabriel, I believe, in the movie. So that's kind of establishing that. And then there's this also team of, we're talking about new characters, which there are a lot of characters in this movie, period, but there's also a decent amount of new characters. I just mentioned 2 of them. Then there's also Shea Wiggum's character, and Greg Tarzan Davis's character. There are a couple of, I guess, CIA agents or something that are trying to track down and capture Ethan Hunt. So you have multiple interweaving kind of groups of people.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there are a lot of characters. Those 2, I was kind of questioning Shea Wiggum and Greg Tarzan Davis. That's Jasper Briggs and Dagus, I think was how you pronounce the agent's
I have
name.
no idea.
But those 2 in general were kind of curious. They're like the third party, that there's like Ethan and the IMF team, and then there's Gabriel and his team, which is led by Palm Clementive's character Paris. She's like this badass assassin. Like those are two parties vying for whatever, like the different MacGuffins they're going after. But then at the same time, there's the CIA, Jasper, Briggs, and Degas, like, and their group of 10 people that we're following, like chasing them throughout the different locations. So it's kind of like a three-way manhunt.
And then there's also, even by the end of the movie, we also have the White Widow, Vanessa Kirby's character, and her brother, who are also kind of in their group that's also involved. Yeah, so it's like 3 or 4 kind of interweaving groups, and it's like a recurring thing. Basically, every sequence or every act, you have, okay, here's the IMF team. Okay, here's the bad guys. Okay, here's the Shea Wiggum and Tarzan Davis characters, and then ultimately, yeah, Vanessa Kirby and her brother are also involved. Then Kittredge. But
it's so interesting. Like there have been, like, even just in rewatching Ghost Protocol, like we've got the good guys and the bad guys, and then there's the like Russian agent that's chasing down after the Kremlin explosion. Like we never really spend like a ton of time developing them, but there's a lot of time spent with Briggs and Degas, these two agents, and kind of Degas being like almost a conscience character of like, oh well, what if Ethan Hunt has always gone rogue because it's what the country needs. It's like the best, like he's doing what's right. So I'm curious to see where that goes in the next movie, if there's any sort of like, we kind of get to the point where there's a mutual respect almost but at the end of this movie between the two parties, between IMF and the CIA agents chasing them. But I feel like they were kind of setting the stage for at least Degas to come over to their side and start helping, as he's like questioning Briggs asks him like, oh, if you had all this power, what would you do? And he's like, I would turn it into my superior. And very clearly being like the by the book, very like doing the right thing person rather than any sort of corruption. So I feel like there could be something there, but these are probably the least interesting new characters. So I don't want to spend too much time on them, because you mentioned Haley Atwell and that airport sequence. She's fantastic. I loved this new edition of Grace. I'm right there with you. Ilsa has been one of my favorite characters, and I love Rebecca Ferguson. And we can talk about her in a minute, but I wish we had more of her, and moving forward more of her. But Grace was still a lot of fun. I think the plotting of maybe like what happened with her and the Ethan's like sudden, like you pointed out, like you've known this person for like 30 minutes and they're not that important to you, but she is really important in the movie to him apparently. But just as a character, she's a lot of fun. This sort of, not, like I said earlier, not an agent, but she is a thief, like a pickpocket, a very high stakes thief that steals art and I don't know, weapons and all sorts of things to get involved in this like very shady underworld. And she's been sent to pickpocket, like you mentioned, those the 2 parts of the keys, and kind of runs into Tom Cruise and to Ethan Hunt as they're trying to do the same thing. And it becomes this at each other's throats, but also like working together in collaboration, but still we don't trust each other. But as the movie goes on, they kind of continue to work together, whether it's reluctantly or not. And by the end of the movie, Grace is essentially an IMF agent. She, as you mentioned earlier, makes that choice to join, but we'll see what happens with her in the second movie. But obviously it's going to be something big, it seems like. But I as a character, as an actress, I thought that this was a fantastic new addition to the team, although I hate that it came at the expense of Ilsa and Rebecca Ferguson.
Yeah. I liked Grace. I thought that Haley Atwell had a good rapport with Tom Cruise, and I think that certainly helped because they are literally attached during a one sequence, which was good fun, and again leaned more into the comedic elements of the franchise, which have always been there. And I mean, watching Fallout the other night, I mean, I pretty much am laughing like a hyena throughout the entire thing, especially the third act, because it's just so, part of it is just, it's genuinely funny and it's directed and written in a way that's humorous, but then also just kind of the audacity of what they actually do and the stunts and whatnot. And in this one, it's similar, especially during the Rome sequence. I thought was just kind of like a total blast in terms of how it was written and how it was shot and the sequence of the chase. It kind of starts, at this police station and then turns into multiple vehicles that they end up using, multiple crashes, and it's the group of characters, including the bad guys, and then the American operatives chasing after them. So it was just well done and well staged, I thought. And that was a great way to, again, this character we didn't really know so well and didn't get to spend a ton of time with up to this point. You get a sense of kind of feeling like, okay, well, this lady has no idea really who Ethan Hunt is or what she's gotten herself involved with. So it's like she's a fresh face. She's not a secret agent or anything like that. So just imagine if you were in her shoes and you got roped into the situation with this crazy man who is like driving all over Rome and being chased, and now you're, a part of it. I thought that was just kind of a good way of kind of putting the audience into her perspective, and making us kind of sympathize with her. But yeah, I thought that Grace overall was a good presence. Haley Atwell again. I have not really seen her in anything outside of the MCU, so not really familiar with her work.
And even then,
overall.
she's not like particularly. I know wasn't there an Agent Carter show, but
yeah,
that's not really like mainline MCU. I haven't seen that, but she very briefly appeared in different shows or movies as Agent Carter.
Yeah, I probably saw more of her in this movie than like every other thing I've seen combined, honestly. And she had much more to do in this because she is, directly involved with some of the big action sequences, and she gets some more kind of emotional beats here, and also gets to do the comedy side of it. So she, I thought, got handed a pretty good, deal in terms of her being introduced to this world and in this like first entry. I presume she's going to be a big part of the next movie, and who knows what the possibilities are in the future going forward. But that's all to say that while I liked her, I wasn't like, oh my god, like she's so cool, like this is such a fun, like super interesting, like new character, like I can't wait to see like what the relationship is. If she had showed up for just the airport sequence and then not been involved at all after that, like I wouldn't have like thought twice about it.
A little Ana de Armas, No Time to Die action.
Exactly. Yeah. Like if she had just been there, even after the events of Rome, if it had been written in such a way where she was no longer going to be part of the movie, I'd be like, okay, like that's fine. Like I get, she got to have her little moment and it was fun with Tom Cruise. But yeah, Ana de Armas, that's a perfect example. She basically stole that scene with Daniel Craig, James Bond, and then they're like, okay, that's enough, like we're gonna move on to the rest of the movie now. And I was totally fine with that, but it's just a fun kind of highlight in terms of, we're talking about not to pit the female characters against each other, obviously, but if we're comparing introductions of new women to this franchise, of which there's been it kind of like a revolving door of women in terms of this franchise. I mean, we had Paula Patton in Ghost Protocol, and I would have loved if she had stayed around and been in future movies, but that was her only appearance. And then in Rogue Nation, we got Rebecca Ferguson, who had been in some projects before that, but this was her biggest role, biggest project up to that point. And I mean, after that first sequence, I mean, she is totally like magnetic in terms of her presence and the way her chemistry with Tom Cruise. And then of course there's the opera sequence after that, and at that point it's just like, okay, like this lady is the like real deal in terms of just her on-screen presence and the action that she's able to perform and everything. And again, her chemistry with Tom Cruise, which I think is so important. I thought that the chemistry between Haley Atwell and Tom Cruise, like I said earlier, was pretty good, and definitely adds the rapport. I think adds quite a bit to her as a character and her involvement in the movie. But it just wasn't like, I've seen a lot of praise for her and like a lot of people highlighting her as like the MVP of the film and whatnot, and I just didn't really feel that way necessarily. I thought everyone was like pretty good and like everyone got it kind of a moment to shine for the most part. But yeah, I think it was kind of it for me. It was disappointing because it did feel like it was at the expense of Rebecca Ferguson. who I think is again a fantastic actor and is especially good in this role. And Ilsa has been a really standout character over the last two movies and has had a good kind of little arc. But I didn't think like I don't know. Again, this is going back. This is my speculation. I don't know if the pandemic impacted the decisions around where they went with this movie and the story and the character of Ilsa in particular. Or if this was just something that Macquarie decided to do and Tom Cruise decided to do, and Rebecca Ferguson obviously must have signed off on it. But I don't really understand, based on the character of Ilsa that we saw in the last two movies, why they decided to depict her in this way, and then ultimately to depict her dying and riding her out of the franchise seemingly. That just didn't, like, from the very opening scene where she's in the desert with Ethan and they're like, oh, well, she's on the run again and she's always been a problem for you. And like, I mean, not really. I mean, she was always doing her job that she had to do to get like free of the shackles of MI6 and British intelligence. And that was the same plot the last two movies. So it's not like she's just been going rogue. She's actually been doing what she's been told to do. But they basically portray her as like a thorn in Ethan's side that he keeps kind of going back to. And then there's like this brief kind of romantic moment in Venice. And it's like, okay, well, like, we know that this is basically a couple. Like, we've seen that development over the last two movies. And the ending of the movie, of the last one, basically showed that they had kind of finally come together and, you know, she had been freed and they could, you know, work together if they wanted to. But it just starts this movie with like, oh, she's gone rogue, like she's doing her own thing again. And they're like, oh, well, we don't know why she's doing it. Like, we don't know what the reasons are. Only she knows. And then we don't, like, maybe I'm missing something or I'm forgetting, but I feel like we don't really get a very solid like ultimatum in terms of like where her story ends up and like when she, by the time she dies, like what we're supposed to take away. Like, I just felt like it was such an undermining of Ilsa, like what we had seen in the previous two. And then even just her death, like, if you want to kill off a character that people love, that's totally fine. Like, you should have the right to do that, obviously, and we'll just have to suck it up. But I think if you are, like, there have been so many chances where it's like, oh man, is Ilsa going to die in Rogue Nation or Fallout, and, you know, so many close calls that would have been interesting. And this is just this new guy that just showed up, Gabriel, and he kills Ilsa. And like, it's just this kind of quick, brief, like underwhelming kind of knife fight on this little bridge in Venice. And like, she just gets stabbed in the heart and dies seemingly.
I feel like my biggest issue with it was the fact that like, it was the whole like setup of it was, Ethan, you're going to have to choose between
that was Ilsa, absolutely terrible,
between Ilsa and Grace. And it's like, we just met Grace. Like, I didn't like the choice of like, Ethan didn't end up really like necessarily picking either, but Ilsa like died trying to protect and defend Grace. And so
what?
Just the fact that it ended up being like one or the other, and like you said, not like, it was kind of like inadvertently pitting the two characters against each other. When we could have had them both, or had Ilsa die under different circumstances, where it wasn't like, okay, well, we have to choose like which one of these women does Ethan want? And especially having that relationship with Ilsa over the last 2.5 movies to then make it seem like, oh, well, he chose Grace, the person from 30 minutes ago, which, like, again, I really liked Grace. I just didn't like the way that these two were sort of pitted against each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I said this in the group chat after the movie, and now that I've like been stewing on it a little bit, I feel even more strongly. There's things in this movie I don't like, and things that I thought were underwhelming or that bugged me. But I said there was one thing that legitimately made me mad and like pissed me off, and it's this plot point of Ilsa dying, and not just the death, but as you just described, the choice that is presented, and this kind of weird pitting of the two characters like against each other, kind of having to choose. I really thought that was just totally, it felt so false compared to what we'd seen from Macquarie and like the writing and the character of Ilsa and Ethan in the last couple of movies. And I just couldn't buy into it. Like, I had no suspension of disbelief. And we talked about this right after the movie. Ilsa, again, I absolutely loved her, and I love Rebecca Ferguson. And it's some of the moments in the franchise, you know, I get a little bit emotional, and like towards the end of Fallout, there's kind of that emotional moment with him and his former wife and everything. Got a little teary eyed on one occasion or two, but I
Mhm.
mean, Elsa's killed off on screen, and you said that you felt differently about it, but I just felt absolutely nothing because I was so mad and confused, and I just thought it was so unearned and underwhelming that I just couldn't. I honestly couldn't believe it. And also, mind you, 45 minutes or an hour earlier in the movie, at the very beginning, that opening sequence I talked about, they do a fake out where
Right.
Ilsa is made to seem dead. And then they
I
bring
like
her
I
back.
100% knew like, okay, yeah, she's not actually dead. Like from that, like they wouldn't do her like that, but then they
Well, I
ended
knew
up,
that because they showed her in Venice in the trailers. So I
yeah.
knew that she was going to be back, but like I didn't buy it either way in that sense. But then when you know that she dies later, like, and in such a strange situation, like if you need to kill off Rebecca Ferguson's character, like why not? I mean, there had to be a better way of doing it. And I don't like that they just did a fake out and then brought her back to do nothing and be a nothing character and then just kill her off again under really weird circumstances. I just thought that that was, you know, again, we're kind of moving through the movie in order, which is kind of good. But yeah, I just thought the Venice thing, and you know, even prior to this death scene and the kind of choice that's made, there's this weird party that they go to, and there's like dancers and there's like projections all over this palace and whatnot, which I thought it was a cool aesthetic. Um, but in terms of this scene, all the major characters in the movie basically show up in the same room. So it's the White Widow, it's her brother that are being reintroduced, plus Gabriel is the new villain, and Paris, his henchwoman, and Ethan and Ilsa and what's the new lady's name? Haley Atwell's character,
Grace.
Grace. So they're all in there, and it's just this kind of they're going on about the MacGuffin and the entity, and it turns out the entity is also at the party. In fact, the entity is the party, as they say in the movie. And so it's just like it's just weird way that it's set up, and they're just kind of bantering on about, you know, fate and like all these different things. It just kind of, again, these scenes kind of fall throughout the movie, and they just, again, this was a sense of me just kind of my brain going fuzzy and being like, okay, like, oh, what's going to happen? Like, what is actually going on? Like, what is this all about? And ultimately, like, the thing is, that scene gets worse for me because what is it all about? Well, it's about setting up the death of Ilsa, essentially, and like forcing this choice between Grace, you know, and Ilsa, and what Ethan is going to do in that moment. And then it leads into this chase sequence around Venice, and Ethan's being tricked by the entity into thinking that Benji is leading him around. And ultimately just the whole sequence, and especially with the chase and like the running after, I think it's supposed to be disorienting because he's lost, obviously. But I just thought that the balance in the editing between the fight with Grace and Gabriel, and then Ilsa showing up and fighting Gabriel, and then Ethan kind of running all over Venice, it just didn't feel like super, like I couldn't like really engage with it. It just didn't feel like super like fluid in terms of how it was presented. And even in this scene in particular, because Venice is such a photogenic city and location, and there's so many interesting elements to it geographically speaking, that, you know, lend it to really interesting photography. I think, you know, this is a step down for the movie in terms of cinematography from the last few movies, which had Robert Elswit on Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation, and then Rob Hardy, I thought, had the best cinematography of the entire franchise in Fallout. um I just thought that there was nothing in Venice or really any other sequences that really struck me in terms of like capturing the epic quality of like certain moments or intimate moments, even with like the close-ups and things like that. There's some fun kind of trickery with some light and like Dutch angles and tilted, like canted angles and whatnot, but it just, all that was kind of getting us to this point where we're leaving Venice. Now we're moving on to kind of the last stretch of the movie. And by this point, I'm just like, okay, like this last third of the movie really better like get me back on board, because I'm just so like frazzled by what we just like experienced in this Ilsa sequence.
Yeah, I mean, I going all the way back to that death, like I still found it emotional and moving, mainly just because of my love of the character, that I was still impacted by it. But I didn't have any necessarily like, we get I guess I can't remember if it's before or after that, but the sequence with Ethan and Paris where they're fighting in the alley, and I guess the Ilsa's death is like the culmination of all of that. Once he gets there, but I thought the party was fine. I didn't have any qualms with it, other than just like the setup of pitting them together and where it led. But I don't know. I definitely, this is like, this sort of discussion is why I'm so excited to rewatch this, because I want to know if my feelings are going to change and where I'm not like riding high on the adrenaline of it all. But looking more critically at it, having time to think about it and see if everything really does make sense to me. But I know I mentioned it earlier, the grand finale being like the train, the mountain, the cliffs, all of this set piece. Did you have, I had said that I found it still to be equally as exciting, even though we'd seen all the teasers of it. Was that the same to you, or were you sort of underwhelmed by it at this point?
Yeah, I think unfortunately I was feeling a little underwhelmed because, and we did talk about this right after. I think that all of the behind the scenes and all of the emphasis on especially the bike jump, in the train bit, like you've seen it, you've seen everything of the bike jump that is in the movie. And I think seeing it even in the context of the behind the scenes and the real world ramifications of the sequence, I think is more interesting and exciting than actually watching it. Like when I watched the IMAX sequence that they showed with Avatar back in December, the little preview they had, I mean, I had goosebumps. I mean, I was so enthralled with that. And even again, I actually watched that same sequence last night, because they had it. There was this thing on TV that I watched, and I felt the same way. Even though I had just seen the movie, I had goosebumps. But actually watching it in the movie, I didn't really feel anything, which is weird because this is supposed to be like the premiere stunt of the entire film. And I mean, if you go back and watch Ghost Protocol or Rogue Nation with the Burj Khalifa sequence, or him riding on the outside of the plane, or diving into that big, tank of water with all the different information that's stored in there, or even like the last movie, there's the big helicopter sequence at the end, which is kind of like the most insane stunt in that movie, I feel like, in terms of like logistics and everything. There's also the Halo jump, which is incredible, and the Paris chase. I just felt like this sequence, and really any of the sequences of action in the movie, didn't really reach that level of any of those. I think that they talked about in the behind the scenes in some interviews that, Tom Cruise had always wanted, like his entire life, to do some big jump off of a cliff, like off a motorcycle, basically, and like, skydive or base jump off of it. So that was something they wanted to do. And they also always wanted to do like a train sequence. And so they had that. I felt like more than ever, and I'm sure they do this on all the other movies, and I just think that it didn't work as smoothly here, is it seemed like they really came up with the stunts for the movie. And then they're like, okay, now what do we do with the story? Like, to set all this up, like even the bike jump in particular, like it's him and Benji, they're like working to get him onto the train, and like it's so convoluted in terms of why he can't get on the train like when he's supposed to, or like how he's supposed to. And so they're like, oh, you got to go, like you got to actually do it off of this cliff now, basically. And Benji doesn't even like tell him that he has to jump off a cliff. He's just like, oh yeah, you got to go up there and do it.
There's a big theme of not telling him stuff during this movie. I was waiting for that to like come back into play in some sense, but it was more of just like a running gag of like at the airport, we're not telling him about the nuclear bomb, and then there was something else. I can't remember. There's something that Grace wasn't going to tell him, and then until way too late. And then this as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. That is something that is recurring. And yeah, you say it's kind of like, is it a theme, or is it just like, we need this to happen because it's just that the stunt won't work otherwise. Like there's no way that he would logically go up and do this unless he had to. So it's like, I couldn't, like when he's driving like on the bike, he's like going over all these hills and like he's climbing this mountain. I'm like what is the actual like in-world logic of like what he's trying to do? Like this just doesn't really make sense. And then they're like, oh, you got to go ahead and jump off the cliff now. And so he just goes over and like drives off of it. Like it doesn't have like a really good like build up. Like if you've seen the behind the scenes, he's going to jump off the cliff, so to expect it. But if you know, if you were going in blind, it's just like, okay, he's driving around and then he says, oh, you need to jump off the cliff. And then he goes ahead and does it. Like, it just didn't feel natural, or like it didn't really have the punch that I was looking for. And that also ties into the him actually getting on this train, which is, again, the train sequence itself, like what they're trying to do on the train with Grace's character, and the White Widow, who's also involved and on the train, and her brother, and then Kittredge also shows up, and also the American agents show up. Like, it was just also like, I know they're like trying to get this stunt to like happen, and then he ends up getting onto the train in like the most insane like absurd way possible, which like you could only laugh at, really, but I was just like in such disbelief like when it happened. And then that leads into like an even bigger train, I guess, group of stunts where they're fighting on top of the train, and then the train goes off a cliff. But that was also like, again, this franchise is so known for shooting on location and doing real stunts and showing the real actors like in these environments, and showing the you know, kind of the danger of it all. I thought that this last sequence, and I've never had issues with this in any others because they do such a good job of masking it or melding it together. But the effects and some of the like CG or like green screenery that was going on, like, I wasn't really sure. I don't know if they replaced certain things or if they went and did stuff in the studio and then combined it with the real world stuff. But it, like, you could definitely tell there was like more of a sheen in terms of like when they're on top of the train and fighting. And then there's also like where it's going off the cliff at the end. It just was, I don't know. It was just a little bit more detached. And obviously that's combined with like my feelings like throughout the movie of, okay, like I'm getting a little bit like restless, and it just didn't, again, it didn't feel as satisfying, unfortunately, as like a lot of the others that we've seen in the franchise, at least for me. There's a really cool bit with the train at the end where they're climbing. That was, as you said, Uncharted-esque, from Uncharted 2, the game, which I thought was really a really fun idea. And I thought it was executed pretty well. But yeah, it just, I don't know. Maybe it was the fact that part 2 is coming and we know there's going to be bigger, crazier things than that. But it just felt like, I don't know, a little underwhelming. And I don't know, you talked a little bit about it, but I'm not sure if if your feelings have changed at all about that.
I feel like we almost were just, it was just like too spoiled because of all of the promotional materials and behind the scenes with, like, I feel like just there's nothing underwhelming about the actual stunt of him jumping off, at least to me, riding the motorcycle off the cliff, and the fact that he really did it and all that. But it was just, what made it underwhelming is the fact that we had seen it so much. Like, if they had teased it once in the trailer and then the first time we see the full thing is in the actual movie, like, people would be going nuts about it. So I feel like it was just like the rollout of it that made this such a, like, because this is like, I mean, I'd have to think like maybe the Halo jump. I don't know. I'd have to ask Tom Cruise, but like what the most like intense, insane stunt that he's ever done for these movies is. But this is like right up there.
They said this is the biggest one, supposedly.
Okay, yeah. So exactly. So like as far as just like practicality, execution, like intensity of it all, like this is by far the most insane. But it's just the fact that we saw it with Avatar, we saw the like 7-minute featurette, we saw it in every teaser and every poster, like that made it, you know, a bit underwhelming when we actually got to it. Because like you said, the second that we saw cut to the train going through those mountains, it's like, okay, so that's how he gets on the train. Like there was no suspense or question or anything like that. It was just like a matter of time until he actually did it.
That's a really good point. And I think even like more to that, what you're saying, I agree with you that the emphasis of it in like the promotion and all the behind the scenes we've seen did hinder it somewhat. But I would also say to some degree or another, and obviously our mileage will vary because who knows what each of us saw or anyone saw in terms of promotional material for the last movies. Like, you knew going to Rogue Nation that he was going to be on the outside of that airplane, and you knew with Ghost Protocol that he was going to be on the outside of the building. And like, there had been photos and videos, and they had done it, talked about it in interviews, and even Fallout, the Halo jump. I mean, that was such a big focal point. And, you know, you saw part of the helicopter flying in the trailers and whatnot, and all of that. And then Paris driving around the motorcycle. All of those, you knew that that was coming. You knew that it was going to be in there. But I think those were set up so much better in terms of story and like in the context of the sequence and what was going on in the movie, that it was just like, oh, like seeing it out of context doesn't really prepare you for how much more like on the edge of your seat it's going to be in the movie, and like how you're going to be holding your breath and like all those things. With this one, it was just like I wasn't holding my breath, or like I wasn't on the edge of my seat. Like I was just like, okay, like let's go, like it's going off the cliff, and then like that, and then that's like it. And also, mind you, the way it's edited, they're cutting away from him mid jump to the train, and before the jump from the train back to him, and then as he's falling, they go back to him, and then he ends up on the train, obviously. So it's like I think somewhere in there, it was a little between the way it was set up in the writing and then also the way it was even edited and balanced between the train and that. It just lost like, and again, the factor of we knew so much about it, I think it just lost the weight that like a lot of the others still have in terms of like how it's written into the story and how it's edited between maybe other events that are going on. Because even Fallout, I mean, there's that helicopter sequence which is so enthralling and so involving all the way through, and it's pretty long, 10 or 15 minutes maybe, but it's balanced perfectly and cutting between a crazy helicopter sequence and also Benji looking around a base camp for like a box, basically. Mm-hmm. And Ilsa doing a little fight scene with Solomon Lane, and then the threat of those two taking on Solomon Lane. And so even with the smaller scale stuff and like having that balance, like it was still done so well, and it was done in a way where it made the tension even greater. And here it just didn't, like the stuff that's going on the train, like I literally couldn't care less about. Like it's just conversation between Grace and as the White Widow and like Kittredge, and they're talking about the MacGuffin still, and is she gonna accept the money or what? I'm just like, I just wasn't on board with it like I was in a lot of the others. And again, I know we're comparing it so much to the other movies, but like, how can we not? Like, it's just, there's a certain like way that they've done it, and it's always been successful. And I just felt like with this one, it was not, even if it wasn't missing the mark for you or like others as much, like I feel like there is still something there as it did for me in that terms. But that it all leads to the end of the movie, which again, we talk a little bit about that to wrap it up. But I don't know. How do you feel in terms of it's a part one? We've, highlighted that already. And we've seen part ones already this year from Spider-Verse and Fast and the Furious. And in recent years, that's been more of a popular, I guess, idea creatively, but it's also kind of a marketing thing. How did you feel about the way the movie wrapped up and how it stands really on its own in terms of the franchise, but also as a part one to a part two, which we don't really know too much about yet, haven't seen much from?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that I had said afterwards when we were chatting. Having come out in the same summer that we had, like you said, Fast X Part 1, which literally ends like on the biggest cliffhanger possible. Like Dom Toretto is at the bottom of a dam that's about to burst, and he's just standing there like no defenseless. Like, who knows what the hell is going to happen there? Like, it was literally just like, okay, we're going to cut this movie in half, and that's the end. And then Spider-Verse has a little bit more of a denouement, but it's like right in front of the biggest thing. Like, we're getting the team together for the biggest action sequence. Oh my God, like big reveal at the end. And then it's like, okay, now we have to wait a year, 2 years. So in that sense, I thought this one was very well done in that it still has a beginning, middle, and end. It can stand on its own. It's no more, I don't know why they're going part one, part two, because this is especially with the Macquarie movies and stuff, like there's no more cliffhanger tie to the next one. It's the same story that's going to continue, but like it wasn't like the previous stories have carried over into this one from the last movies. So like I don't think it was necessarily like, oh my God, like you have to have these back to back. You have to, like, this is part one, this is part two. Like it could be two separate Mission Impossible movies that are just bleed into each other. Like I don't know if this makes sense. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but it was very well wrapped up. in the sense that it didn't leave me, it left me wanting more, but not like, damn, I can't believe like we have to wait all this time to figure out this big reveal that's about to happen or something.
Yeah, I mean, I felt pretty similarly to you. I didn't think that it was an abrupt cut in terms of like feeling like we're right in the middle of, you know, something that's happening and now we're not going to know and we have to see how long we wait and not sure what to expect in part two. I would say my gripe would be, and I could see like, you know, it just really depends on my overall feeling about the movie, I think, because I can accept more in certain circumstances than maybe I otherwise would. Like with Spider-Verse, for example, it is pretty abrupt and like you are left hanging, but it's such a good movie that you can just like, you're like, okay, it's fine. Like as long as that next movie delivers, like I'm not going to, this won't matter.
Right. That is very clearly part one of a two-part though,
Yeah.
whereas that to me, this one was like, yeah, it's like it's gonna have a sequel, but it like this could be 7 and 8 versus like part 7, part 1, and then part 2, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely think this felt more like that, like you described. But I think this would be maybe more akin to like a Dune part one, where a lot happens and
Yeah,
there's like
true.
there's a certain like central conflict set up and it's not really totally resolved, but it kind of leaves you where like things have calmed down and now you just have to wait to see what happens next. I think it's not as much of a shock and it wasn't like a disappointing feeling, I would say. But yeah, I think in terms of, you know, going into part two, like expectations for that and kind of how we feel, I guess maybe it's strange because I feel like my feelings about part two have changed from before watching this movie to after, obviously. What do you think and kind of what's your expectation? It's supposed to come out about a year from now. I don't think that's going to happen probably.
Yeah, I know there's still a lot to be done with it. It's still like being written, being made.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that turnaround time is going to be doable. But I mean, again, like I know we talked about a lot of the issues with this movie, but still at the end of the day, like I gave this 4 stars. It was an 87 out of 100. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I love this franchise and I'm still very excited to see where it goes next. Like I said, the new characters of Grace was great for me. I'll obviously miss Rebecca Ferguson unless they decide to pull like a Fast and the Furious here and start bringing people back from the dead. But Grace moving forward, Paris is still alive. Palm Clementief's character. I imagine we'll have the squad back with Benji and Luther. And you know, throw in my Queen Hannah Waddingham, and what more do I need? That's the perfect recipe for me. So I'm still very excited for part 2 whenever it comes, and I'm sure that'll be, whether it's next year or beyond, still at the top of my most anticipated list.
Yeah, so this movie, like I said, was really towards the top of my anticipated list for multiple years now because of the delays and the pandemic and whatnot, and how much I loved Fallout. And likewise, part 2, you know, knowing that there's a continuation was also, you know, very much up towards the top. I would say I'm not as excited now for part 2 just because I felt so. Again, I think this is not a bad movie. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's, you know, I think it's worth the price of admission to go see it and experience it on the big screen and with an audience. And they, you know, put in obviously a lot of time and effort and a lot of it does pay off. For me, it was just the overall experience in terms of the story and the characters just wasn't on par. And even some of the action, like there was some great moments here, but it wasn't even on the level, I think, of some of the more recent films. So I don't know. I can't help but feel like a little like tempered in terms of what I will expect out of a part 2. If it's great and if it's just kind of redeems like this movie and just feels like a big step up, then I mean, I will be totally over the moon. And I hope that's going to be the case. I'm of course going to just keep an open mind. I said this in our chat, but something similar happened with the John Wick films. Again, different types of movies and not as quite, you know, obviously doesn't have quite the legacy and longevity, but I really, really liked and loved the first 2 movies. Wasn't crazy about the third one. I actually was disappointed. Thought it was a little bit more kind of in the middle for me. And then that kind of tempered my expectations for chapter 4, but then I absolutely loved chapter 4. Thought it was awesome. And I actually think I was talking all during the first half of the year. I was like, Dead Reckoning, that's going to be the best action movie of the year. I love John Wick, but I don't even need to think about that. And I would say, I said this after the theater, and I think John Wick Chapter 4 is still the better of these movies for this year, at least. Now the stunts, obviously, there's very different stuff going on in both of them, and you can kind of debate what's more impressive or more dangerous and all of that. But yeah, I think I'm just not going to think about Mission Impossible for a little while. I just did like a whole marathon of the movies, and I've seen Fallout a couple times in like the last month, and then just saw this, and I'll be seeing it again. As of this recording, I'll be seeing it again in a couple of days. So, stay tuned for if any thoughts change and feelings. But yeah, I'm just gonna kind of wait and see. Not gonna fixate on it too much. But yeah, I'm just grateful that big movies like this are being made, and we have a star like Tom Cruise that's willing to put it on the line to make them, and McQuarrie and the whole cast and crew. You still got to take your hat off, even if it maybe wasn't quite up to where my lofty expectations were.
Very fair, very fair. We'll have to revisit this, maybe next podcast or two down the road. By the time we see this again, we can circle back and see if feelings have changed after that second viewing. But as we get towards the end of the episode here, we've got our 2023 So Far Superlatives. We are going to be handing these out. Not real, made up awards from inside the film room. Just some fun little categories here. But since we are 7 months in at this point, we are over halfway through 2023. We want to celebrate what has been a great year for movies and TV so far. So we will be handing out these awards. First up, Johnny, again, not real titles, not real awards, but this one's fun. Biggest surprise. and we can do this within TV and movies. You can have one of each. You can have one answer for all of it, whatever you want here. Again, this is a very loose awards show. What's your biggest surprise?
You might say we just made it up, Zach.
Hey, I don't know if we call them the filmies, the ITFREs. Like we have to come up with an official award
the
title.
Roomies.
So start the roomies, so we can start sending these out to people.
But biggest surprise of the year, that we're leading off with that.
Yep, let's hear it.
Okay. I would say, so on the film side of things, for me, I thought this movie was going to be just a total mess, just such an uninspired kind of cash grab of a blockbuster attempt. But Dungeons and Dragons, I thought was really surprising, obviously, and I had a really good time with it. I went to kind of not an advanced screening, but I went to kind of a one that you would still have to pay for, but it was an earlier kind of fan preview, and it was a sold out theater, I think, and everyone had a really good time. Like the vibes were great, and it was funnier than I thought it would be. It was cleverer than I thought it would be. The action was well done. The effects were good. So it didn't do super well in terms of box office, unfortunately. I'm not sure how it's doing on like streaming or like on demand. But Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, if you haven't seen it yet, give it a shot. Check it out on streaming, rent it, buy it.
I think it's on Paramount Plus.
It is on Paramount Plus for streaming for sure. So if you haven't seen it yet, give it a shot. I don't think you'll be disappointed. It's just a good time. And I would pay to see another movie with the same characters or in the same world. And in terms of television, Shrinking on Apple TV Plus. I know that this is doing pretty well, I think, in terms of numbers, and I know a season 2 is on the way, but I haven't heard a lot of buzz about it necessarily online or just my kind of circle talking about it. And I keep recommending it, but the people that have watched it have said they liked it and or loved it, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's one of the funnier, if not the funniest show of the year, and also had some great messages and some more heartfelt stuff in there. And Jason Segel's excellent in the lead role, and Harrison Ford with some of his best work I've ever seen from him. And the whole cast overall is just really a good time seeing them work together. So give it a shot. It's on Apple TV Plus. Apple TV Plus, as we all know, maybe a little bit underrated, but maybe not for much longer. I feel like more and more people are getting wise to how kind of high quality and how frequently they're pumping stuff out.
Pound for pound, Apple TV Plus, the best streaming service as far as originals go. I still think Max has them beat as far as licensed catalog. But no, Shrinking is fantastic. I've been on that since day one. I will always campaign for it. I love it. I didn't think it qualified for me as a surprise because I was already looking forward to it just because of the love of Ted Lasso, knowing who is behind it and what we were getting into. But I think you mentioned like a lot of people, you haven't heard a ton about it. I feel like it's pretty solid looking at Emmy nomination predictions that it's like fringe, like maybe that 7th or 8th nomination for comedy series, outstanding comedy series. It might be able to squeak in the door there, but I believe as far as predictions go, that Harrison Ford is the unanimous favorite. Well, I wouldn't say unanimous actually. Now that I'm looking at more, looks like Tyler James Williams is also predicted for Abbott Elementary. Some people have him slotted one, but Harrison Ford for outstanding supporting actor in a comedy series. He's got a strong campaign going there. So at least those 2 Emmy nominations, potentially more. We'll see. If you want more shrinking, go check out our interviews there on the website and the YouTube channel, because there's a lot of fun stuff there. But for me, biggest surprise, this is not a particular movie, it is a genre, but the R-rated comedy making a huge comeback this year, at least in terms of quality of movies being made and put on the big screen. We'll see how the financials play out, because that's always what seems to keep these movies from being on the big screen. But No Hard Feelings a couple weeks ago, Joyride coming out this week. Those are 2 hysterical, raunchy, R-rated comedies. Jennifer Lawrence is amazing in No Hard Feelings. She's the range to go from Causeway. We've known she's an Oscar-winning actress. We've known she's talented, but Causeway late last year to then go to this ridiculous comedy about a 30-something trying to seduce a 19-year-old boy, like that's called range. Get you someone who can do both. But both of these movies are hysterical. No Hard Feelings. Joyride is a great, it's like if The Hangover had heart. It's this group friendship comedy, super R-rated, super vulgar, but a lot of fun, and also surprisingly sentimental, with a strong message of, purpose, belonging, identity, all of these topics that I know we saw this together, and I told you I did not expect to tear up in this ridiculous comedy, but here we are. So I'm super excited that both of these are at least getting high praise from critics, from fans. We'll see if it leads to more at the box office and more of these movies coming out. But we also have, what's that dog movie that is coming out at the end of the summer? It's like Will Ferrell and Kevin Hart, maybe.
Is it Good Boys?
No, Good Boys was what came out in 2019. That's what No Hard Feelings.
Actual human
Gene
people.
Stupnitsky. Yes, that's Jacob Tremblay.
That's right.
The Gene Stupnitsky that did No Hard Feelings also did Good Boys. But let's see, it's Strays is what it's called. That's coming from Universal Pictures. Yeah. But that's another R-rated comedy that's going to be coming out. It's got Sofia Vergara, Will Ferrell, Jamie Foxx. So we'll see if that one's. I'd probably say that's the least promising one of these 3 movies, but the fact that it's going to be on the big screen in a couple months is what's exciting to me, to keep having these movies. Like I think one of my favorite things about No Hard Feelings was that when the trailer first came out, we were all like, is it 2006? But I was so here for it, because that's those kind of movies are what I love, and to be able to see them on the big screen rather than a streamer is fantastic. So that's my biggest surprise. I also threw in a TV one. You mentioned it earlier. We both did Jury Duty. Had no idea that was being made. Saw people talking about it online, and then binged it all in a couple of days, and it's absolutely hysterical. The scripted nature of everybody else, but the hidden camera nature of what we get with Ronald is hysterical, and to see James Marsden be so funny in it, and all the other characters that we get, it's just brilliant. And I would love to. It was so magical the way they captured this. I don't know if they could do it again, but I would love to see them try, because it was just the most absurd thing I've ever seen. It was not. I wouldn't say that. The Rehearsal is like far more absurd, but this was like just the scenarios they kept presenting this and like pushing the boundary. It's different kinds of absurdity. But the way that they did this and just like kept seeing like how far can we take this and still not have him realize was amazing and ridiculous. But so that's the R-rated comedy and Jury Duty are my biggest surprises. Biggest disappointment, Johnny. Anything here that has been letting you down so far this year?
Well, I gotta say, I hate to say it after we just discussed it, but in terms of how high my expectations were versus my at least initial ultimate feelings about it, I'd have to say Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, unfortunately. I mean, that is probably a testament to how good a lot of the movies I've seen this year have been, especially in terms of what I expected them to be. Um, and there are maybe some other movies that would have been disappointing if I'd actually went and saw them, but I ended up not seeing them because I just I didn't want to subject myself to it. But Dead Reckoning leaves some things to be desired. It just feels like, it's towards the bottom of the Mission Impossible listing for me in terms of how it compares to the others. But again, not a bad movie, but just you can't help but feel a little disappointed about it. In terms of television, I also had a show that just failed to stick the landing for me, unfortunately, and that was Ted Lasso. Now I know,
Don't do it to me.
I know, I hate to say it, but I binged basically. Reagan and I binged the first 2 seasons. Absolutely loved the first one. Really, really liked the second one as well. And I know that one was a little bit more divisive, but we really liked the different stuff that they did with it and some of the I guess more bold decisions they made creatively. I thought they paid off. And then season 3 just it was so long and it was just so all over the place in terms of character lines and story, and it just didn't live up to the first 2, unfortunately. Again, I wouldn't say it necessarily even outright like bad. I only saw it the one time. Obviously, I haven't gone back and watched it yet. I probably won't. But I just, even where it sticks the landing in terms of the finale, I'm not sure how much it sticks the landing. I just didn't feel as fulfilled by the end of it like I did with a Barry or a Succession, for example, two of the other big shows that we kept up with.
You're entitled to your opinions, I mean, season 3 had some ups and downs, but I still was very pleased with everything that came from it. But my biggest disappointment, I've only got one, and it was on the big screen, and it was Beau is Afraid. I know this is one of your favorites of the year, so I'm sorry, but the fact that I don't know if this qualifies as biggest disappointment because I was already hesitant and nervous going in just from the trailers of it, and we podcasted about this, so go check out the full episode if you would like. But just the disappointing fact here is that even though I knew it was likely coming, the fact that I love Midsommar so much, that I love Hereditary so much, and then the diversion from 2 different but similar movies into what this was, I missed the train on this one, and unfortunately, I think I am more disappointed in myself, not in myself, but just disappointed in the departure from the type of movie that Midsommar and Hereditary was into more of this, existential and surreal type of movie here.
Yeah, it's definitely different.
It's been well established that's not my type of movie, so
yeah,
just a bummer that I'm not more
fair.
aligned with that.
No, that's fair. And I wasn't disappointed by it. I definitely wouldn't describe myself as disappointed, but it was definitely not on the level of a Hereditary or Midsommar, at least in my feelings. But it was just so shocking and so different, and it did appeal to a lot of my sensibilities. So I still had a good time with it and walked out thinking, I got to see something that was very different and very challenging in some ways. But I still have to revisit it. I haven't seen it a second time, which again speaks to how my feelings about it are different from Hereditary and Midsommar. But I'm looking forward to checking that out again, and that'll be interesting to see if my feelings do change upon rewatch. But yeah, no, I won't hold it against you, Zach. It's okay.
I appreciate it. This one here, Best Part 1, a very specific award to the summer so far. As we mentioned, Fast X Part 1, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, Across the Spider-Verse. I know technically the next one's going to be Beyond the Spider-Verse, but this was advertised as a Part 1 and Part 2 of the movie. But I think it's unanimous, Johnny. Across the Spider-Verse is the clear superior Part 1 from what we've seen so far this year. Are we agreed there?
Yeah, I mean, it's the best movie of the year so far, at least from the movies I've seen.
Agreed.
And so by default, it's got to be the best Part 1.
Although I will, ride or die for Dom Toretto and the gang. Fast X Part 1, absolutely beautiful cinematic masterpiece. Speaking of the absurdity in one sense in Beau is Afraid, absurdity in a different sense in Fast X Part 1. But here we go. The MVP award. Who is your MVP of 2023? Let's hear it. You know,
So
I see you've got a couple here.
I'm gonna cheat a little bit. So I'm giving for on the film side of things, film MVP for the year, all of the incredible, hardworking, imaginative animators and the artists involved with that on Across the Spider-Verse. I mean, they had a very, very tall task following up the original, which was such a universally acclaimed film and so beloved in so many ways. And they could have, again, rested on their laurels, done the same type of style, you know, not strayed too much, but they really took a lot of chances. They really branched out, did all different types of styles, and got really, you know, almost like avant-garde in some places, very expressionistic, and but still maintaining the feel and the adventure and the aesthetics of like the comic books, for example. So yeah, they absolutely went above and beyond. And of course, that also goes to, you know, the directors and, you know, the producers and all the people that make it happen. But the animators that actually do the work to bring the images to life, I think got to get credit there. And then on the TV side of things, a little bit different here kind of as well. I would say Jesse Armstrong, the showrunner, the creator, the writer of Succession, head writer. You know, he had a tall task. He had 3 exceptional seasons of television. And he had more eyes on him than ever coming into the final season, and the you know, the stress and the pressure of that. And I thought that he absolutely delivered a fantastic final season, a fantastic finale, and he was the sole writer on the last 3 episodes, kind of the home stretch of the season. So I thought that he really rose to the occasion and cemented himself as one of the all-time greats, I think, as far as television and creating such a you know, it's not on the level of a Game of Thrones in terms of popularity or something like that for HBO, but I think in terms of acclaim, I mean, you could put this right up there with The Sopranos and The Wire and some of HBO's kind of Hall of Fame. So I'm very curious and excited to see what he does next. Certainly hope we get more television from him, wherever that may be, or maybe even film. But yeah, I think got to shout him out. He'll be getting his Emmys here not too long from now, I think.
Yeah.
But
Oh yeah. I completely agree and support both of those picks. Super well deserved for some excellent people behind the scenes making these. Mine, I went with more of an all-encompassing pick here. If you followed me on Twitter or Inside the Film Rooms posts, you probably already know where I'm going. Nobody's doing it like Rebecca Ferguson right now. I know we just talked a little bit about her unfortunately being underutilized in this movie, but still the fact that she is like headlining one of the biggest blockbusters of the year in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 at the same time that she just finished starring in Silo season 1 on Apple. That show it's not quite to the level of, I know you have said this, it's not quite prestige TV, quote unquote, yet, but it's very much headed in the right direction as far as this incredible world building, suspense, mystery, plot, all of these fantastic performances, different star characters here. But I loved Silo. Juliette Nichols was a great character that Rebecca Ferguson brought to life. She's crushing it, literally killing it, unfortunately, as Ilsa in Mission Impossible. And then we still, when all is said and done, we'll have another performance by her as Lady Jessica in Dune Part 2 at the end of this year. So I think as far as just like an across the board successful 2023, she's got to be one of the top contenders in my opinion. So major respect to Rebecca Ferguson. That is my MVP. Johnny, a very official title here. The more people need to see this award. What's under the radar? What do people need to stop sleeping on as far as movies or TV this year?
So for movies, this was the first movie I saw. This was the first 2023 release I saw in theaters this year, just period. Back in January, I think it was during the NFL playoffs, as a matter of fact. I spent a nice Sunday morning at the theater and saw Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool with Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth. And it was a great start to the year. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very close to the level, if not on the level of his prior film, Possessor, which I thought was excellent. But yeah, Infinity Pool, if you can handle the the grimier, more disturbing elements, I would definitely recommend checking it out because I had a good time with it, and all performances are great, and I just like Brandon Cronenberg's style. Definitely worth watching. And in terms of TV, Zach mentioned it earlier, but Jury Duty on Amazon Prime Video, I had a really good time with that as well. I came to it a couple months, I think, after it actually came out. I had heard about it from a coworker, and I saw it on there and saw some stuff on Twitter. So it looks pretty funny, and I ended up binging it in a single day with Reagan, my girlfriend. So we really had a good time. And one of my things that I liked about that, you mentioned the rehearsal earlier, Zach, but something I appreciate about Jury Duty is that it is very like crass, and it does do some like kind of raunchier things, but in terms of the actual tone and like where it ultimately ends up, I think it's really kind of in good spirits, and like it's kind of has a
Very
nice,
earnest.
it has a very nice earnest energy, and a lot of that can be attributed to the main guy who's in it, whose name escapes me right now.
Ronald, our king.
Yeah, Ronald, he's the GOAT. He's excellent. It's worth watching just to get to know him, like, and see what he goes through for sure. But all the performers and whatnot are also excellent, and yeah, it's just a good kind of light watching. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I already talked about it. Love Jury Duty. Have not seen Infinity Pool, so the more people need to see this award is very accurately named. I know it's on Hulu right now, so maybe I'll check it out. I didn't see any of Cronenberg's other movies. Haven't seen Possessor, so I don't know if I'm up for it. We'll see. But my more people need to see this award on the movie side is going also to the first movie I saw this year, just like you, Johnny. But I'm going with Megan. Megan took the world by storm in January, but I don't know if if people are still talking about Megan, if people still remember about Megan, if it was just like a one-hit wonder little thing. I know we're going to get more movies in that world, but more people need to see it. I hope it extends past just that initial blip in the pop culture stratosphere early in the year. But it was funny, it was scary, it was way funnier than I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be like a horrible cheap thrills joke, but it was actually a really, really good movie and still one of my favorites of the year. So I'm a big fan, love Megan. And then I just finished singing Rebecca Ferguson's praises about Silo. More people need to see that. We've already got a season 2 coming. It's based on books. Read the books, watch the show, do whatever you need to do. This show is great, and it's only going to get better as we continue to explore the silo and the mystery and what's outside, and who knows. It's such a fun, engaging, thrilling show. So Megan and Silo are my more people need to see this award. Johnny, I think we're pretty aligned here for the remainder of these awards. Favorite movie, how's it looking?
So Spider-Verse, still the best movie of the year for me. I absolutely loved it. I saw it 4 times in theaters, and but I will mention also another movie that I also saw 4 times in theaters is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Did a review on the last episode, so you know how much I loved it. But yeah, I that one probably gets to my heart a little bit more than Spider-Verse, as much as I love that movie. But yeah, I would definitely highlight that as probably it's going to be up there in terms of blockbusters and comic book movies, for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mine also is Across the Spider-Verse favorite movie of the year so far. And I feel like that's going to hold steady until we get pretty deep into the fall. Looking ahead, I don't know. There's our final award that could potentially dethrone it, but it's nothing on the immediate horizon that I think has a threat of knocking this off the top spot. Absolutely love it. You mentioned the animators earlier. It's just the most beautiful thing. My desktop computer wallpaper and my laptop computer wallpaper are both stills from Spider-Verse. I've got the first movie poster on my wall, so it's no surprise that this is my favorite movie of the year so far. Favorite show, though, Succession. We talked about it earlier, how we hadn't gotten to talk about the finale and everything, but what a show. Season 4, wrapping up the series, but this, Sunday night, 9 p.m., what a drop-off we had switching over to the Idol. But Succession had a fantastic run this season, every single episode continuing to get better and better, and just an absolute gut punch, surprising, shocking, heartbreaking, but also justified ending to this. Like, I can't sing the show's praises enough, because it's like you said earlier, just going to absolutely sweep come award season. I'm nervous for the infighting between Kendall and Roman as far as who's going to win Best Actor in a Drama, but I'm pulling for Kieran Culkin, pulling for Roman here.
Yeah, that's fair. I'll certainly be happy with anything they win, most likely. But this show has been really a highlight for me over the last few years. I would say when I first started watching it, and I've revisited it so many times. I mean, I'm literally in the middle of watching it right now. I'm like on episode 2, season 3. So it's just something I'll throw on in the background because I'm just so comfortable with it. Love the characters, and I think that's a testament, that I still want to do that. That I still want to go back and watch the show. Is because of how strong the last season and the finale was, that I continue to explore it. Unlike some other shows where if they don't stick the landing, it disappoints you at the end. Sometimes you're not inclined to want to revisit it, especially so quickly.
Yeah, I still am owing this show a rewatch all the way through, but haven't gotten to it yet. But I know it's gonna just continue to, like you said, sink into me as I watched it once again. But final category in these very prestigious awards, the Roomies, I believe we dubbed it, most anticipated movie. Looking ahead, so we just did all of these 2023 so far superlatives. This one we're looking at the second half of the year, most anticipated movie or show for the rest of 2023. I think there's one thing on the radar, Johnny.
Oh yeah, it's Dune Part 2. We're not going to beat around the bush. Anyone that's listened to this show for any period of time at one point or another has probably heard our effusive love for Dune, especially myself. The first one was like my most anticipated movie probably ever, especially with the pandemic delays and whatnot. And, there was a huge push, and myself, included. I was very anxious and hopeful that Part 2 would come to pass. And, it was greenlit pretty much right away. And it's been a fun couple of years kind of following the development and the casting news and the shooting and whatnot. And just came off, fresh the second trailer, which was probably one of the most acclaimed and talked about trailers that I can remember, recently. My hype probably couldn't really be higher at this point. No, we have a lot to look forward to between now and then in terms of movies. Oppenheimer and Barbie right around the corner, but this just, a lot of my attention is focused on Dune, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the promotional material that I'm sure we're going to get, and interviews and behind the scenes stuff. So, yeah, really, really excited. That's kind of the top of the mountain in terms of what is going to be, I think, overall a great year.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. This is what we're looking forward to the rest of the year. There's a lot to look forward to, but this is the big one. And that first movie, Part 1, it was just setting the table for everything that this one's going to be. Not to diminish that one by any means, but as Denny has said himself, this is just going to blow it out of the water with everything that it is, and the scale, the story, all that. So I'm definitely right there with you, looking forward to this one. And I believe that wraps up the inaugural So Far Superlatives from inside the film room. So what a prestigious show. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. We really appreciate it. This was a much quicker, probably the quickest award show on the circuit. So we at least have that going for us. But thank you so much for listening. I know it's been a long time since we last did this, so thank you for your patience and sticking with us. And be sure to check out those interviews that we were doing during the hiatus from the podcast, because it's a good time over on our YouTube page.
Absolutely. Thank you all for the support and staying tuned in. Going to keep them coming the rest of the year. So come along for the ride. Follow on Twitter, Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. You can catch all of our episodes there, as well as the fantastic interviews and other material that Zach has coming your way. And you can find those accounts at Inside Film Room.
And you know what, Johnny? Follow us on Threads too. We're breaking new ground over there on the new social media platform at Inside Film Room as well. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to the Rewind newsletter and subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, anywhere you can find a podcast, we are there. And be sure to come back next time, where we will be breaking down the biggest doubleheader of all time, Barbenheimer, Barbie and Oppenheimer. We'll see you then.